So if there's one character in the entirety of Naruto that's more polarizing than Sasuke is, it's Obito, without a doubt. When interacting with Naruto fans, I rarely ever find a middle ground with Obito. Everybody either loves him to death or absolutely hates him. Given the ever-changing, almost schizophrenic nature of his character, I can totally see where all the ire directed at him comes from, but I do think that this hate is misplaced. Now, just like with Sasuke, my thoughts on Obito are based on my own personal interpretations of what he says and does, and I think he's one of the most psychologically complex characters in the entire series, on the same level as even characters like Itachi and Nagato. I also consider Obito one of my favorite examples of a tragic character, just period. But before I continue presenting opinions, I should probably get to backing them up first, so let's get into breaking down Obito as a character. I'll start with analyzing his various motivations throughout his life, as a change in aspirations or goals has often marked a significant character change for Obito as well. When he's first introduced to the audience in Kakashi Gaiden, he fills the same role in the series that Naruto seems to. A glowing example of a character composed of all of the tropes that make up a typical shonen protagonist. And in terms of motivations, well, he's aiming pretty high, as just like Naruto, he wants to become Hokage. The audience also receives a pretty decent, at least surface level look into Obito's morals and philosophy, as we learn that he's actually the first person to have said, shinobi who break the rules may be scum, but shinobi who abandon their friends are worse than scum, and we soon later learn that Obito seemingly gave his life to save Kakashi's. It's revealed in flashbacks and later chapters that Obito's also just naturally prone to help people, and he finds it very hard to turn away from anybody who's in need of assistance, even if it's a case as petty as an old lady needing to be walked across the street or something like that. This paints a pretty decent picture of who Obito is as a person for us. As a child, he was very nice, very kind-hearted. Above all, was just a good kid. He clearly values camaraderie and friendship very highly. He's naive and idealistic, all that sort of stuff. I think you get the idea. Now, many people find it hard to accept that this transparently innocent kid made this crazy transition into a psychopath responsible for starting the 4th Shinobi World War. That he would do all of these terrible things, be responsible for the murder of thousands of people, despite his roots as just a nice little boy. But I do think that there are plenty of factors that lend to this being a much more organic transition than people give it credit for. So for starters, Obito was an orphan just like Naruto was, and Naruto has admitted on various occasions that being ostracized the way he was really took a toll on his psyche, and that if he hadn't encountered the friends that he had, like Kakashi, Iruka, Sasuke, Sakura, etc., he may have ended up just as badly as Gaara did. Now, Obito wasn't a Jinchuriki, so he didn't have to deal with the complete ostracization that Naruto did, but he was a member of the Uchiha clan. Now, thanks to Madara's actions, the Uchiha clan, even before the Nine Tails attack, wasn't really on good terms with the rest of the Leaf Village. Now, add on to this that Obito's not very good at anything. He's not very bright, he's pretty clumsy, and his stats in the data book are abysmal. Hopefully you're starting to see why not too many people would really want to associate with Obito. He's pretty clearly a prime target for bullying, and may have ended up just as isolated as Naruto was. I wouldn't be surprised if Minato, Rin, and Kakashi ended up being his only 3 friends. Now, the next piece of this puzzle is when the 3rd Shinobi World War comes around, Obito becomes a child soldier. Obito's no older than 12, and he's fighting a worldwide war, killing people he's never met before, and being forced to watch his comrades die right in front of him. He's constantly left without the care of Minato, and it's safe to assume that he's seen some pretty terrible things over the course of this war. By the time he's had half of his body crushed and he nearly dies, Obito is probably a bit more cynical and jaded than the series leads you to believe. Not quite to the extent that somebody like Nagato is, but he's still reasonably a pretty bitter person. Now, a lot of people think that Obito seeing Rin die is the only thing that caused him to go through the character change I mentioned earlier, but I just think this was the straw that broke the camel's back. Now, they weren't in a committed relationship or anything like that, but Obito did still love her, so seeing his best friend Kakashi stab her through the heart with a Chidori was probably difficult to swallow. Again, I don't think this on its own was enough to prompt Obito's character shift. I just think that in combination with everything else, not to mention some additional persuasion from Madara, seeing this was enough to cause a major paradigm shift in Obito's mind. I think life constantly kicking Obito while he was down caused his idealism to slowly erode away, but this event right here was enough to make it shatter. Obviously, such a massive change in philosophy is going to cause a person's long-term goals to change, but there are a lot of people who seem to be misinformed about what this meant for Obito. Once he learned of the Eye of the Moon plan, many people seem to be under the impression that Obito was enacting it for his own benefit, that he was selfishly doing this in order to escape the friend zone and get some alone time with Rin, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Like I said before, Obito is prone to helping people, and he does what he thinks is right regardless of the consequences for him. With his new warped perspective on right and wrong, I think Obito's dream of becoming Hokage to keep the Leaf Village safe evolved into becoming the ruler of the world to keep the entire planet safe. He believed that he would be initiating the infinite Tsukuyomi for the good of all mankind, and see, this is where things get tricky. Obito knew nobody else really wanted to be trapped in the infinite Tsukuyomi, but he didn't care because he thought it was the right thing to do. His drive to complete the Eye of the Moon plan is this very weird blend between selfishness and selflessness, created by his belief that everybody did want this plan to be completed, they just didn't know it yet. Obito used the same sort of rhetoric as Nagato did in order to rationalize what he was doing and justify his own actions. The idea that nobody knows what they're missing, but what I'm doing is in fact for the good of everybody. So now that we've established that Obito thinks he's committing a worldwide act of benevolence, now we need to take a look at all of the bad things he's done. Again, I think Obito operated under similar logic as Nagato did. He viewed every crime he committed as a necessary sacrifice to achieve the greater good. Now, his personality and attitude towards the world and those in it may make this seem very hard to believe, as many of the things he says are filled with sarcasm. He many times comes off as very arrogant, and he has a habit of finding humor in the most morbid of places. But I don't think this comes from malevolence, I think it comes from detachment. He even explains to Kakashi, albeit a little clumsily and cryptically, that he views the current reality as worthless, and he doesn't care about anything that happens within it, making it impossible for him to feel sympathy for any of the people who his actions affect. He doesn't care about receiving validation for his actions from other people, and this is made no more evident than in the final arc after the Jubi is extracted from him. Now, before I get into that, I should probably talk about the character transition itself, as a lot of people have a problem with Naruto talk no jutsuing Obito onto the good side, and all of Obito's sins being forgiven. A massive misconception among people regarding this character change is that Obito seems to think he's a good person after fighting alongside the main characters, and that's just not the case. Obito is well aware that he is beyond redemption by this point, and that he has crossed the moral event horizon many times over, and I think this conflict of ideals presented by Naruto is something that's been inside of Obito's head ever since he took on the name Madara Uchiha to begin with. By the time Madara found Obito, the kid had barely aged into his teens, and he was very easy to manipulate. He was a young kid, he was super impressionable, and by the time he attacked the Hidden Leaf Village, he wasn't much older. I think by the time he grew old and mature enough to start questioning many of the things he had done, he came to the conclusion that he was already too deep into all of this to turn back. Like I said, Obito had crossed the moral event horizon and knew there was absolutely no redemption for himself. And let's face it, for me and for any of you guys, coming to grips with the fact that you have been wrong about something of this magnitude and facing the consequences of it is not an easy thing to do. Not to mention, I think the Eye of the Moon plan gave Obito more of a sense of purpose than he'd ever had in the Hidden Leaf Village, as evidenced by the fact that he became more calm, more focused, he acted less rashly, less stubbornly, applied himself in a way that he felt would make a difference, and discovered that he's in fact incredibly smart, one of the smartest characters in the entire series in my opinion. I would imagine that a drive and a sense of purpose so intense that it heightened his capabilities would be really difficult to let go of. Not to mention, detaching himself from the rest of the world in order to become its messiah allowed him to run away from all of his problems. He didn't have to think about any of the things that had emotionally bogged him down in the past, and whether he was consciously aware of this or not, it without a doubt made convincing him that what he was doing was wrong a whole lot harder. It's very obvious that Obito had doubts that he suppressed throughout the entire series, and I mean, he pretty much tells Kakashi all of this word for word. So when Naruto, who he sees as a living, breathing version of the younger Obito, brings all of these doubts to the forefront of his mind, it causes his will to waver. This is the only reason why Naruto and Sasuke are able to break through the Sword of Nunoboko, which is the physical embodiment of Obito's will. Naruto shatters his will and makes him accept all of the doubts that have been stirring in his mind for all this time. But this does not mean that Obito starts to think of himself as a good person. As a matter of fact, the first thing that he attempts to do is sacrifice himself to use the Rinne Rebirth Jutsu to bring back all of the people that he had killed, before Madara uses Zetsu to hijack his body and force him to cast the Rinne Rebirth on him. If anything, I think that this is one of the most believable instances of talk no jutsu in the series, as Obito had pretty much always agreed with everything Naruto was saying, he just suppressed these beliefs in order to escape from everything that he had to deal with. When he can't use the Rinne Rebirth to atone for his sins, Obito decides that at the very least he owes it to the world to help Naruto, Sasuke, and everybody else save it from Madara and then thereafter Kaguya. Not because he feels like it'll help him in any way atone for everything he's done, but again because he feels like it's sort of an obligation. He knows that he is beyond redemption, as made evident by his conversation with Black Zetsu, that he has been used and thrown away by Madara, turned into a criminal and an enemy of the world, and has been left with absolutely nobody who loves or cares about him. And instead of attempting to justify or rectify anything he's done, Obito simply accepts this, and goes on to sacrifice himself to keep Naruto and Sasuke alive, before delivering one of the most powerful lines in the whole manga. He turns around and tells Naruto to become Hokage at all costs before disintegrating. Obito's character arc really is tragic. It's of a man who goes from an idealistic little kid who has a dream to become Hokage and the potential to do it as well, to a sociopathic S-ranked criminal with a god complex who just kind of wants to watch the world burn, to a defeated, reformed, hopeless villain who's forced to cope with everything that he's done to everybody up to this point. Kishimoto does kind of ruin the whole tragedy thing by having him go to ninja heaven and chill out with Rin, but let's ignore that, okay?